One is publication process. Then we're going to go into ethics, which is the soul of writing. All we do in science will be nullity if we don't do it ethically. So we're going to be discussing how to go about writing, doing research, putting into consideration the ethical issues around writing and research. But before then, I haven't gone through writing introduction, methodology, and writing result and discussion. Today we'll take a look at how do you get your work published. Please give me some few seconds to change from. So we're going to be discussing how to go about writing. Apologies for that. One of my device was playing on its own. So I'm trying to change from my phone so that I can share screen. So give me some couple of minutes to do that. So I can stop, pause recording.
All right, sir.
So while I move from this device to my laptop, I just want to know, has anyone been involved in publishing before? Anyone on the call? Let's hear from you what your experience was. Anyone on the call that have been involved in publishing? Okay. So I'll just share. Yeah, I've seen the message. No. Yeah, so that's the essence of this training. I'm sure that by the end of this training, you will be able to navigate publication process. I would like to share my screen. Please permit me to share my screen.
Oh, okay. Let me just make you co-host. Yeah, okay.
The new device.
I already make you co-host so you can share now.
Okay. So very quickly, we'll discuss how to navigate publishing process. Publishing process is a whole different ball game on its own, which we need to understand what it entails and how you go about it. Having written a very beautiful write-up, you also need to have the knowledge of how you ensure that it gets to the audience you intend to reach. Remember that we write not just for ourselves, but we write for others to make use of the knowledge we want to pass across. So you need to pass it through a vehicle that gets your knowledge across to those who require it. So in the next couple of minutes, we're going to be looking into this. At the end of the day, I will expect that you understand the steps for publication. You know how to prepare your manuscript for submission, know how to respond to reviewers, then what are the things that increase your chances of your paper being accepted. By the end of the day, if you know this, then I think my job is well done. So why do you publish? I already alluded to this. One is to share new knowledge, to make others know what you found out from your study so that they can use it for practice or promotion, health promotion, preventive measures, understanding of etiology of disease, or all related aspects. So you need to share knowledge. Of course, you also use publication as a means of career advancement or academic promotion. For you to have a master's, to you to have a PhD, you're expected to have made some publication. For you to move from a lecturer to a professor, you'll be expected to have made some couple of publications. So it's an important aspect of career progression. And as well as it's also important for advancement in areas of programs where you're a part of a program. Those are one of the things that is used to advance you. Then also, for you to be able to contribute to policy development and changing practice, it's your publication that helps to do so. Then your reputation as a scientist, your reputation as somebody in the academia, or your reputation generally as somebody who is into clinical practice is based on some layers on the level of publication, how well published you are. So these are the reasons basically you publish. But I must emphasize here that the most important reason why we publish is to fill knowledge gap, to make people know what we already know from the study we've carried out. So what are the types of publication? I think in one of the previous classes, questions were asked as related to this, as it relates to this. Publishing original research article, such as doing a research work and getting it across to the world is one. You can do a review article in which essentially you are going through what has been published in the past and putting them together, giving a summary so that you can give proper perspective or understanding to what is already known. Pulling together different publication for you to make a commentary or to review what is already known so that you can improve the knowledge on what is in existence. Then case report is also another way of publication in which you report a common presentation, a representation of a common condition or a rare condition on its own, making the world know that this exists and letting them share from the knowledge of the existence of that condition. So case report and it's actually a low-hanging fruit for people like us who are beginners. You can easily write a case report and that may be a starting spot for you. Then you can write commentaries, editorials, and all of that. Of course, conference abstract is usually one of the earliest phase of publication where you go present the work you've done, give a summary of what you've done so that the world can have an understanding of what you've done before you even have the full manuscript published. So these are just examples of publications we have. So when you want to publish, when you want to get your message across to the world, the way to get it across to the world is through journals. And I'm sure you are aware of what journals are. These are publishing avenue for you to get across your message to the world. So in choosing your journal, you look at different entity or different areas to take a decision on which journal suits exactly the work you are presenting. One is to look at the scope of what you intend to pass across and the audience you intend to pass your message across to. So for example, I've written a manuscript that relates to how Nigerians can improve their oral intake of vitamin D. So apparently my target population is Nigerians. So I would do well to publish in a Nigerian journal than to pick an Indian journal of nutrition. Yes, it's the world of the World Wide Web where you can easily access anything. But even at that, it's better to target your audience, to look at your audience when you are writing. Again, talking about audience, I cannot be writing on nutrition and pick Journal of Engineering as my target journal. Then even within an area, so possibly I'm writing on health generally, I should look at the scope of the journal I'm targeting. So for example, BMC journal, there are a couple of BMC journals. that's British Medical Central, if I'm not mistaken, journal. They have a whole lot of journals. So if I'm making a publication on women health, I probably will not go to PMC pharmacology. I rather do PMC women's health. So you look at the scope and the audience that you intend to target in picking journal. Another important factor you look at is the bibliometric assessment of your journal. What is the rating of your journal? So journals are rated using different indices. The most common or the most talked about is the impact factor, which essentially is speaking to how often is the journal cited based on number of papers in the journal has published in the last 2 years. How often has the journal been cited? So if publications within a journal gets published often, then you expect that there's going to be high impact factor, as opposed to when you have a journal in which the people don't get to cite the work from that journal, the impact factor will be low. So impact factor is a popular measure of how well a journal is rated, but it has its own setback. For example, I'll give an example, which I often like to give. If I have a journal during the 2000 to 2023, when we had the COVID pandemic, and a journal is focused on COVID, and it started publishing from year 2000, because there was limited knowledge of COVID before year 2000, most of the work that is going to be done on COVID is likely to cite that early comma in COVID, and therefore the impact factor will be inflated, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's a high quality journal. But generally speaking, impact factor is a measure of the quality of a journal. The another thing you look at when you are going to make a choice of journal is the indexing. When we talk about indexing, so when a online journal is made available online, usually there are databases that store those journals within their database, so that when you go to that database, you can access that journal. So for each of those databases, they screen and scrutinize the type of manuscript that gets indexed in their database. So if a journal is indexed in a particular database, it means that some level of scrutiny has come into place before it's indexed in that database, and it gives some level of credibility on that journal. So sometimes we talk about Scopus index, PubMed index, and the likes. So you are encouraged to publish in index journal rather than publish in journal that have no indexing. Again, I must mention that the fact that a journal is not indexed does not necessarily mean it's a poor journal, but an index journal is more often than not a high quality journal. Now, the reason why I mentioned this is that when a journal starts publication immediately, they don't get indexed. It takes some level of it takes some months or number of publications before journals are considered for indexing, and before they eventually get into the index. So some new journals which are credible may not be indexed. Another thing we look at is whether it is open access or subscription-based. Now, there is no free meal anywhere in the world, not even in Freetown. That means there is no free publication anywhere in the world. Wherever publication you are making, somebody has to pay for it, and the person that pays is either you as the author or the reader paying. So depending on who is paying for that journal to get out, or government or NGOs may be the one paying. So depending on who is paying, the journal can be subscription-based or open access. So when we say subscription-based, it means the reader have to subscribe to that journal in order to access the content of the journal. And that is how publication process started long ago. But because of the move towards liberalization, or let me use democratizing access to knowledge, they have been called to make journals easily accessible, especially for those of us in low and medium income countries and low income countries, so that we can, sorry, okay. Nimat, you want to ask a question? Nimat, you can unmute and speak. Okay, I guess it's an error. So, in order to make knowledge accessible to everyone, then we have the open access, in which
Excuse me, sir, it's not an error.
Okay, go ahead with the question.
Yes, the indexing, can you please take it again? I'm not entirely clear.
Okay, so I'll take it again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, thank you, sir.
Okay, so I made mention that there are databases. Databases are like a library that store, just like when you, I'm sure you did use of library in 100 level. When you go to library, you have different articles stored within your library, your physical library. So we have online library, let me use that word, that gets journals stored within them, so that when you want to access journals, you can just go to that library, then they will give you access, or you'll be able to search for those articles and make use of them. So we have several index databases. We have Web of Science, Embase, PubMed, and many of them. So I mentioned that the index, getting index in any of these databases usually takes some level of scrutiny. So if you have a journal indexed within a database, it's a reflection that it has gone through some scrutiny, and it's actually it's assumed that to be a credible journal. Of course, there are some limitations to this, which you may get to discuss, but generally speaking, that suffices. So if you are trying to pick your journal, it's always good to use an indexed journal. But I also give a word of caution that some new journals may not be indexed, because it takes a while before you get indexed in any of these databases. So we need to understand that as well. So going back to the open access, which I am talking about. Now, for open access, the reader does not have to pay to be able to read. So once they have access to internet, they search for your work, they're able to read your work. But that now means that you, as the author, needs to make payments in order to be able to get your article on that open access, and it refers to as the article processing charges, and it's usually exorbitant, and it's a challenge for us in low and medium income country. But not to worry, the most of the journals of the publishing house have what we call waivers, what we call APC waivers. What they do is that they, because of our level of income, they help us waive APC. So you're having both sides of the divide. They're able to publish your work without making payment, because you have a waiver, and the reader does not need to pay to read it. So it's essentially takes care of making your work easily citable, and without you making to break the bank to be able to make your work readable. So that's about open access. And there are different types of open access, which I will not want to go into now. Maybe during question and answer, we may go into it. But that's generally one of the things you consider. So if, for example, you are making a publication based on a grant, then a subscription-based, a open access journal, you can actually publish in it without necessarily, and you will make your APC without needing a waiver. Or if you are publishing without a grant and you need to make payment, you need to consider the APC before you go for the journal. I also check whether they have APC waiver policies which you should explore before picking a journal. You shouldn't get to submit your work to an open access journal, then your work is accepted, but you cannot pay for APC. Is not a good thing to do. So those are the things you consider. Then, of course, you look at the author's guidelines and all of that before you go ahead to submit your journal. So I've talked about this. Just to emphasize, when you are making a choice of your journal, look at the scope. I've mentioned that. Look at the editorial board. And let me, at this point, talk about what we call predatory journal. I'm sure some of you must have heard of that, predatory journal. Predatory journals are journals that avoid doing the needful. They do not do the appropriate thing about publication. What makes a scientific publication different from a newspaper article is peer review process. Peer review means that after you've written your work, you submit it to peers through your journal for your peer to read what you've written, to critique it, to identify the gaps that you need to improve before it's now made available to the public to read. Peer reviewers are like gatekeepers that ensure that whatever gets to be read by the public is credible information. So when you now submit to a predatory journal, they do not really do this peer review process. Once you submit, they accept it, you pay article processing charge, and within a few days, your article is published. It may get carried away by the fact that you are getting your work published, but the fact that it doesn't go through the rigor of publishing makes your work depletes the quality of your work, and you should not be seen publishing in a predatory journal. And this is one of the things you should actively look out for when you are submitting your work for publication. So I've also talked about indexing and databases and the importance of metrics such as impact factor, site score, Schemago journal ranking. So let me just talk about Schemago journal ranking, which is the ranking by one of the databases, that's Scopus. So what it does is that it divides all the publication in a field into 4. Remember that if you remember our mathematics, when we divide something into 4, we say they are quartile. So you divide it into Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. So first quartile, second quartile, third and fourth quartile, so that those who are top ranking within the field are Q1, and those who are low ranking are Q4. So the Q1, of course, are more reliable compared to the Q4. And we expect that people trained within our work, within our program, should target Q1 and Q2 journal, which are easily, which you can, if you do a good work, you can easily get published on them. So as part of looking for where you should publish, because sometimes you get your work ready, but you don't know exactly where you should send it to. One of the things to do is to use different methods to check. One of it is to use Write, Think, and Submit. Write, Think, and Submit is a website that helps you to determine whether your work is to prevent you from publishing a predatory journal. It checks what you want to, where you want to submit to, and helps you to decide whether it's a predatory journal or not. Jane, which is journal and author, sorry, I've forgotten the full meaning, but it's a website, again, that helps you to review potential journals that you can submit your work on. Then the Bears list is a list that was made by one editor some years ago. He sat down and listed out journals that are predatory, so that people want to publish can go through that list to be sure that they are not publishing in that list. Yeah, there's some controversy over Bears list, but majority of journals that appear in Bears list are predatory. So you should be careful. If you see a journal in Bears list, you should look at it. Take a second look at it before you put your journal there, before you put your publication there. I will advise you even avoid it at all in the first place. I said there is controversy over it because some journals have actually criticized the list that they are wrongly labeled as predictive journal. Then many of these publishing houses have their own journal finder. So I've listed some of them here: Willy, Sylvia, Springer.com, EndNotes, Manuscripts, Matcha, Dispatcher.live. Many of them, they have their journal finder, so that, publishing houses have many journals. So within that publishing house, once you put your details, the summary of what you want to publish, they're able to select those journals that fit what you want to publish. In terms of preparing your manuscript submission, ensure that you follow what we've always talked about: the introduction, manuscript, the method, results, and discussion structure. Check the referencing format that ensure that it suits the journal you want to submit to. Ensure that you are adhering to the journal instruction. Usually, there is a journal instruction given to by every journal. So any journal you want to submit to, they will provide you with journal instruction, which you should read through carefully even before you start writing. Then, of course, consider ethics when you are making your publication. Now, when you get to the point of you've processed your your article, is fit into the journal requirements, you ensure you've picked the journal you want to submit to. The next thing is to go onto the online submission system, which many of the journals have their online submission system. A few of them will require you to just send a mail, send your work as mail, but majority have their platform, which you familiarize yourself with. They'll tell you, of course, the process of submission will be clearly explained to you, which you're expected to follow. So you log into the submission platform and follow the instruction. One of the key things you'll be required to do is to write a cover letter. A cover letter is a letter that is summarizing the import or the importance of your manuscript. In it, you're expected to, of course, put your address the editor. It's often good when you have the name of the editor to address it, personalize it to the editor, and write to the editor that you're writing to. Write the title of your work. The content of your cover letter will include telling the author what your work essentially is all about, the importance to the audience of the journal, you're expected to talk about the fact that it has not been published previously and or no part of it has been published. And if it has been presented, you're expected to mention it. You're also expected to mention whether you have conflict of interest or not, and the fact that all authors have reviewed and accepted that the work should be published in that journal. Of course, you write the cover letter so that it gives the editor you speak to the editor in such a way that is willing to get your paper to the next stage. So, like you writing, in quotes, a love letter to someone, you need to write it in such a way that is captivating enough. Of course, you should not exaggerate what is not in your work, but write appropriately and all of that. So when you submit your work, what happens is that the editor, usually the handling editor, will take a look at your cover letter to see that it's within the scope of your letter of the work. Take a general look about the formats of your work and the scope of what you are writing to be sure that it fits into. Sorry, there is a message. Let me see.
Yeah, that's allowed.
Okay, yes. Hello?
Okay. Okay, you can go ahead when you're done.
Okay, thank you. So you look at that, then there are different types of peer review process. We have the single blind, double blind, and open. They essentially is talking about whether the reviewer gets to know who the author is and whether the author gets to know who the reviewer is. And there are different methods, there are different journals used, so you need to check what. Sometimes the journal will ask you to nominate reviewer. Like I mentioned earlier, reviewers are gatekeepers. They essentially, what they do is they help. What they do is they help to ensure that the quality of what gets to the audience is of great quality. And when you submit, you can get accepted. You may get a minor revision, major revision, or a reject. So rarely will you have accept at the first instance, but you can have minor revision. They will essentially tell you what you need to do to make it appropriate. So when you get a reviewer, when you get to a comment from reviewer, you expect to respond politely. Pick each point the reviewer has mentioned and give point-to-point response. When you think what the reviewer has said is you don't agree with it, you should respectfully communicate what you think and why you think the edits may not be appropriate. Ensure that you address all the revisions. So after your work has been accepted, usually they will send a guiding proof to you, which you are expected to give the final corrections to your work. In terms of typesetting, check that the names of author are well spelled and well positioned. You will do some licensing in terms of copyrights of your work. Then your work gets published and gets online. Then after publication, it's also your work to promote your work on LinkedIn, on every social media. Use every opportunity to ensure that your work is promoted. And more importantly, you celebrate yourself for having done a great work. So let me round up very quickly. One of the common pitfalls while a manuscript may be rejected is that if you don't have a clearly defined research question, your method is, like I emphasized during the discussion of method, you cannot build something, you cannot build on a faulty foundation. If your method is wrong, there is no correction that can be done about the work again. So usually it's going to be a reject, no matter how important your area of study is. If your method is wrong, then you cannot rely on your findings. So ensure that you use appropriate method, follow the journal instructions, and then write. We've mentioned this in previous discussion on why your conclusion should be important. Start writing early, seek mentor and writing groups, form a writing group with yourselves. Ensure that for writing is not about how verbose you are, it's about clarity and conciseness. It's not about how much your writing is. Like I mentioned in the last class, it's about how well you're able to communicate a message with the least number of words. So publishing is a stepwise process, and you need to start the process for you to learn it. There is one of my early papers that I made. It took a year. It took about a year. Incidentally, it's a journal from your school. Journal, Savannah Journal. I can't remember the full name of that journal again. I think Savannah Journal. It took almost a year to get that work published. It was correction over correction before it's finally gets published. And I had a work published in Lancet, and it took less than 2 weeks to get published. So it's something that comes with preparation, and you must be persistent, and that's the only way you can improve your writing. All right. With that, I'll say thank you very much for listening. I'll take a few questions before Dr. Petre comes in to speak to you about a concept that is I would say is the most important message that I want you to take away from the whole of this course, which is ethics in research. Without ethics, whatever we do is a nullity. So you have to understand the importance of ethics. So I will stop sharing and take questions while Dr. Petre prepared to come on. So any question for me? Hello? Finally, you can make Dr. Petre post so that she can start sharing a slide.
All right, sir. Sorry, the person that asked about journal, do you now understand now? Because I think I already typed the definition of journal on the chat box.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think you've addressed that. Okay. If there are no questions, I guess maybe after the end of Dr. Biteri's presentation, there will be a question for me. I think we should not delay our heading further. Dr. Biteri? Yeah, so let me just introduce Dr. Biteri. Of course, whatever introduction I do is going to be abridged. He's one of the foremost ethicists in the country, having trained both locally and internationally in research ethics. And she does not just teach ethics, she's very passionate about ensuring that ethics is respected by all scientists. She's passionate about teaching it, and I'm sure by the time she takes over this presentation, you see what I'm talking about her passion for ethics. And I hope that by the end of this session, you guys will be as passionate as she is about ethics. Dr. Peter, over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Dr. Lawal, my brother and partner in research. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.
Yes, University of Ilorin Medical Students Association for having me for this particular program. Well, we're going to go straight. I think we've taken some of the time, so we just need to start up. So just to say that just as they have said, I'm Dr. Betere, and yes, I have my background in public health, a fellow of the West African College, but I also have blended interest in research ethics and research integrity. So that's my advantage. I'm a public health physician and also have interest in bioethics. So this particular evening, we'll be looking at the ethics of research. I'll dive into also a part of research integrity, plagiarism, a bit of misconduct, and maybe just say a bit about referencing. But I'm sure that you have a virtual lab maybe where you can have hands-on on reference. But I'm going to dwell majorly on the ethics of research. So we're going to dive into these using these outlines.
Map, okay.
Yeah, I can see.
I
So
was
what
going to...
ethics is, we'll just use this outline as we go ahead. And at the end of the day, I think you should be able to understand what research ethics is. It's important. And know what, which is very important. If that's the only thing you take home from this particular meeting, will be what makes a research ethical and the concept of informed consent in research. So ethics is a branch of knowledge, just as you have various aspects in medicine, in the social sciences. So you also have ethics is a branch of knowledge. But one thing that is peculiar to ethics is that it deals with moral principles. And we all know that moral principles actually guide a person's behavior. The way we conduct ourselves, the way we conduct our activities are guided by our moral principles. And the major essence of ethics is to safeguard human dignity and to promote justice, trust, truth. So whatever it is that we're doing in ethics, we are trying to safeguard the dignity of human. We're seeing humans not just as animals for research, but that these people actually have dignity that should be safeguarded. Now, there are three things that, there are two things that link closely to ethics, and that's policy and law. Now, there's a way I try to describe it. Now, ethics tells you, what should I do? Yes, I have a particular scenario, I have a situation. What should I do? But law tells you what you must do. So it's not about, you're not negotiating if I will do it or not, but it is what you must, not should now. Then policy is actually what you should usually do based by the policies that actually exist. So that's the way to look at it. But we can't talk about research ethics without looking at what research is. I'm not going to bore us with this because I know you've had some introductory lectures on what research is, but I will just say two things: that whatever you're doing, these two things, you're conducting a research. It does not, I don't care what people say, what people think, but if you are doing these things, you are obviously conducting a research. So are you undergoing a particular systematic investigation, a scientific inquiry to find something out, and with the aim of contributing to generalizable knowledge? And I put it to you that you're conducting a research. It doesn't matter how you go about it, but if you're going through a scientific process or a systematic investigation. And at the end of that systematic investigation, that scientific inquiry, you intend to contribute to generalizable knowledge. Then you are conducting a research. And it can involve various things, which I will not bore us with. It could be that you're trying to answer one or more research questions, you're analyzing data, you're collecting data information in an organized way. You're conducting a research. You're trying to draw conclusions from probably a result that you have gotten. You want to draw conclusions. And at the end of the day, you want to contribute to generalizable knowledge. Then you're conducting a research. Now I go to the meat of the matter, that's research ethics. So there are two keywords there. It talks about research and it talks about ethics. Remember we said earlier that ethics are moral principles. So we'll see research ethics as a set of rules. You can put it as principles that inform the design, the analysis, dissemination, and implementation of research. If you look at this definition, you see that it covers every aspect of the research, from the design to the conduct, to the analysis of your data, to the dissemination of your data. And in the implementation of that particular findings, you need to carry ethics along all the way through. Now, I want to say a bit about this. Now, ethics comes even in the design. So you've been able to conceptualize a study. You must carry ethics along from the very design to the conceptualization. You're looking at your study participants. One, to say that the whole essence also of research ethics, if you remember when in my introductory talk, I said you want to promote what? The dignity. So whatever it is that you're doing in your proposal, you want to see that what? You are promoting the dignity of that participant that will be involved in your research, or in the process of your dissemination of your findings. You're also putting this into practice. Now, people usually, why is ethics important in clinical research? Yes, everybody with ethics, they keep telling us you have to get ethical approval, you have to consider ethics while you're conducting your study, even in the conceptualization, the dissemination. Why is it important? One thing you must know is that ethics promotes the aim of your research. It makes sure you try to avoid error as much as possible. It promotes the values like trust, accountability. Now, there are times probably of us have had an experience. I don't know how many of us have had experience of submitting a work to the ethics committee. Anybody? So I'm sure a few of us have. Yes, all right. So you see, sometimes when you submit your work to ethics committee, it comes back with a response, some responses. Oh, why did you not do this? Why did you not do that? The whole essence of all that is to ensure that you are accountable. You are accountable to yourself, accountable to the public. Because every time you meet a research participant, when you share your questionnaire to them and say, oh, fill this. Now they accepted, they actually opted to be part of that study because they have trust in you. So whenever you do anything unethical in the conduct of yourself, what it means is that you have undermined the trust that your participants have placed in you. So ethical standards, so one of the importance of ethics is to actually promote standards and promote values like trust, accountability, integrity, respect. And the respect is mutual. You respect your participants. To the point of administering your questionnaire, you must respect your participants. You don't throw the questionnaire to them because probably you have a higher power, authority over them. But you must get their consent. That's where the principle of informed consent comes into play. Now, before a participant actually gets to, you must obtain their consent. It's not by force. Probably you are their physician, and because of that, you feel once I give them the questionnaire, they must feel it. No. So they have a right either to get involved in the study or decide not to be a part of that. So you must respect that particular right of the participants. Another importance of ethics is to promote the vulnerable group. Now, there are people referred to as vulnerable groups in research. One of them, children. And for this particular group I mentioned, we have additional safeguard. You might not do it for others, but once you have these people involved in a research, the additional safeguards that are put in place for the pregnant women are also involved. People who have some form of handicap or the other, mentally deranged, who are maybe distorted mental, they are all vulnerable participant. Everybody, individuals can be vulnerable at different points in their lives. Yes, I might be vulnerable today, I may not be vulnerable tomorrow, but it depends on the situation. So whenever you have any power interplay where one person has superior over the other person is most likely to be in a vulnerable situation. As a student, you can't be vulnerable when you're conducting your supervisor or your lecturer is conducting a research and you are the participants. What makes you vulnerable? Because he has a superior power over you. So sometimes we have a situation where you have lecturers are forcing students to be part of research and students can't say no. Oh, if I say no, how will my lecturer feel? And the lecturers force you to be a part of it, so that's unethical. Also, left for ethics, most researchers are just interested in getting the results from their study. They want to conduct study. You hardly have very few, except those who understand ethics, who are actually genuinely interested in the participants. And that's where the ethics committee comes in. So ethics makes sure that our participants are not being exploited. Also ensure that you respect the privacy and confidentiality of information shared. For example, a participant shares an information. And that's why you see when you submit your questionnaires, they say, no, we don't want identifiers. How are you going to store? It's going to be asking you, how do you want to store the data from this study? You don't just place it anyhow, where everybody knows what each person has filled. You must respect the confidentiality and privacy of the participants. There must be fair treatment of subjects. Oh, you don't say, oh, because this is my brother, this is my sister. You know, if you look at the principles of biomedical ethics, you have autonomy, and one of them is justice, fairness. And this must be captured from the very start of your study to the end of your research. And you see that all this, why ethics in research? Over the years, there's been several historical accounts of serious harm to human participants. There are several of them. You probably have heard of the Nuremberg study, the trials where you had various prisoners of war who were exposed to very high freezing temperature. Yes, because it's order to conduct a research, not minding the impact it will be on these particular participants. We know of the Tuskegee Fizzily studies of the Blacks in Alabama who actually had syphilis, but the issue was that when the treatment was available, they were not exposed to it. Why? Because somebody was interested in knowing the natural history of syphilis, not minding the effects on the research participants. Of course, the milkshake study, Willowbrook study, the Jewish chronic disease hospital study. So it didn't just come. The world did not just suddenly place highlights on, oh, we need to pay attention to ethics, but because of some of the harms that have been done in the past. And if you come down home, we all know about the Trovan trials in Kano State. And the result of all this was that everybody, the world came together and said, we need to have a code, we need to have regulations that guide researchers in conducting their studies. Otherwise, you see people conducting study haywire, everybody's just interested in conducting a study and getting the findings, not minding what happens to the research participants. And first, I'm going to share my slide with you. I talked about the Nazi. You see I said a bit about that. Ethical misconduct. If you have time after this particular meeting, I want you to go and watch. There's a video on the Nazi experiment. If you watch that video, whenever you want to conduct study and you want to perform any unethical practice, it brings that picture comes to your mind and it tells you, no, you shouldn't do that. I always advise researchers. You see, you had an inclusion of captive populations in research. Why? They were vulnerable subjects and they felt these are people who nobody will stand for them. Nobody defend them. They will be very good guinea pigs for these studies. The participants' consent was not sought. The researchers went so cruel, not minding the impact on the participants. Very high-risk procedures were performed on the participants. Of course, nobody will speak for them because they were captive populations. And this was what generated some of the codes and guidelines that we have currently in research ethics. Of course, the Tuskegee study, I talked about that already. You know, the researchers were interested in knowing the natural progression of untreated syphilis. And the doom there, the evil there was that even when these particular participants who had syphilis, when the treatment for syphilis was available, that was penicillin, they were not able to receive it. And it was intentional. because somebody wanted to study the natural history of syphilis. If you look at that image there, see, it speaks a lot. It says your blood is bad. It means you have syphilis. That's another stereotyping. And also there was some stereotyping of Blacks in that particular study. Now, it didn't end there. Several years after, of course, there was a civil suit. And 1.8 billion was filed against those who were involved in the study. But I want to ask, if 1.8 billion was filed for those who were involved in the study, will it bring back the people who have died? Obviously not. The people who have died are gone. And of course, the participants only received $37,000 in damages. And the heirs, for those who were deceased, received 15,000. And I ask again, will that bring back the people who had died? Obviously, it won't. You see, this is why every time we conduct participants, when we conduct research, we must conduct research with the values, moral values. You know, like I said earlier, ethics is about what should be done. What should I do? What is the ideal thing to do in this situation? Nobody's going to force you because it's not law. If it's law, of course, you have to abide by the law. And when you go against the law, you face the wrath of the law. But in ethics, it's not such. That's not the situation. So you are guided by your values. So when you're conducting that study, be guided by values. When you're filling your questionnaires, I see some students, sometimes they are conducting research. They don't even fill questionnaires. They probably sit in their hostels and they are cooking up data. Speak, let your conscience speak to you while you're conducting that research. And of course, we had the Henry K. Beecher's article. And of course, it explains several kind of ethical misconduct that you can have in the course of a research. And he gave about 22 examples. We can look at that much later. The Brino-Brook studies, where milkshake, another situation of vulnerability here. Children with mental retardation, of course, they were filled with milkshakes from people with hepatitis, and those children were deliberately infected with hepatitis. Another reason why nobody will speak for them. These are children that they're already mentally retarded. They owe nothing to the society. Nobody will speak for them. So I'm thinking they are just very good guinea pigs for this research. And resulting from this, the world stood and said, no, an end has to come to all of this. And that resulted in the ethical codes and guidelines. Many of us were aware of some of the codes and guidelines. You have the Nuremberg Code of 1948, the Helsinki Declaration that had undergone several revisions, the Belmont Reports, which many of us know that gives us the principles of autonomy, justice, and beneficence for research. We have the SIOMS guideline, and also we have the ICH Good Clinical Practice, which recently this year was updated. If you have time, you can also look at that document. What we are saying is that all of this code resulted from the harm that was done in the past. It didn't just arise because people sat down and say, can we have some regulations that will guide researchers when conducting their research, to see that they conduct research in an ethically compliant manner. Now, we'll just speak a bit, highlights about some of these codes. The Nuremberg Code of 1948 basically speaks on the issue of obtaining consent, and that it's important to obtain what? Consent. You don't conduct a research without obtaining consent from the participants. And I want to encourage you and oblige you. You know, you're young researchers, you're starting now. It's always good to get it right from the start. For some of our senior researchers, many of them probably they didn't have this foundation. So they grew up learning to do research, just go and collect data and that's all. But I want you to get it right from the start. Don't ever conduct research from participants without obtaining consent from them. It's unethical. And whenever you're conducting a research, you must be sure that you're qualified to conduct that research. One of the things also is putting safeguards for the research participants. That's why you see, we always say when you're conducting research, do you have the relevant experience, training, and education? For example, somebody wants to conduct a clinical trial and you don't have the experience, you're going to put your participants at risk. The Nuremberg Code also speaks about the risk-benefit ratio. And what is the aim? That when you are conducting a research, be sure that the benefits of this study outweighs the risk. Of course, we understand that in research, you may have one form of risk. No research is risk-free. Let me say that. Because sometimes some of you, when you're filling your your consent form, when you come to the risk statement, you say, oh, this research, there's no risk. But I put it to you that for every research, there is a risk. If a participant is feeling just questionnaire, you think it's not a risk. It's a risk because if there's a breach of confidentiality, then you put that participant at risk. Sometimes you're conducting some studies and you're asking some questions that makes a participant go into their past and bring some kind of emotional disturbance to them. You have caused a risk, a psychological harm to that participant. Yes, you might look at it because you've not collected blood or you've not pricked the participant. Some of us, that's what we think is risk. You can't have psychological harm caused to participants or something that makes a participant brood just because you asked a particular question in your questionnaire. So as much as possible, even though we know that we will have risk in studies, but we must say that what the benefits of that study should outweigh the risk. If you're going to conduct a research in a group of mentally retarded children, be sure that that population is the only population that can answer your question. Or in children, be sure, if you look at the 45 CFR 46, the common rule for the US, which also a regulation that guides research ethics over there. It speaks about that if you're going to conduct research in children, be sure that that particular research, it's only that population that will answer. If another population, maybe probably adults can answer, why would I put a child through that stress? That's about a risk-benefit ratio. An experiment should avoid all unnecessary physical suffering. Very important. If a typical one that did not obey this particular rule was the Nazi experiments. When you're conducting any experiment, be sure that you try to eliminate every unnecessary, listen to the word, unnecessary mental suffering. And one other thing when you're conducting research, don't go into conducting research thinking that your participants will follow through from beginning to the end. You must give your participants, I know researchers don't like to hear this, but you must give your participants the right to withdraw from the study when they no longer feel comfortable to continue. That means you are respecting the rights and the dignity of those participants. Of course, we have the Helsinki Declaration. It speaks about that what the interests and the well-being of the research participants must prevail. Very important. It's more important than the science. Oh, I want to conduct this research. Oh, to find out this about this research. Yes, beautiful idea, beautiful research idea. But above that is the what? The well-being. You must place the well-being and the interest of your participants foremost before any science you want to conduct. The declaration also brings in the importance of a research ethics committee, which is being called IRB in some climes. Some people call it independent ethics committee. Whether you hear it as independent ethics committee or independent review board, you're talking about the same. You're talking about the ethics committee. In Nigeria, we call it Health Research Ethics Committee, HREX. We are saying the same thing. It also says that what research must be reviewed. And look at the word. And independent of bias, an independent committee should review Then we go on and on. You see Declaration of Helsinki. We've said a bit about that already in the others. You see the codes are linking into the other. So you look at some code, you find some components in one, you find in others. So you have some similarities across the various codes. So we have guidelines too. It majorly highlights informed consent in research, the protection, like I've said before, protection of vulnerable population in research. And let me say here, using children, because children are vulnerable populations in research. And that's why you see, when you're going to conduct a research with children, once they are once a child is less than 7 years, the parents would give consent. But from 7 to about 17, before they become adults, that child should be able to assent of the research. So the child should be able to assent to be the part of the research. So you have things like assent form for children. Those are additional safeguards that are put in place to ensure that you respect. Yes, it might be a minor, you call them minor, but they're not minor as it were. They also have rights that should be respected. Then of course we have the ICH GCP guideline. It talks about the responsibility of researchers, review by ethics committee. Then of course, after the Trovan trial that happened in Kano, that gave rise to the Nigerian National Code. I'm sure many of us have done that. We have people who have done that course. Nigerian National Code. Can I get a response from the participants? Are there people that have done the course? Hello? Am I being heard?
Hello, ma.
Yes. Am I being heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm asking,
People
are
are
there
responding on the
people
chat
who
box
have,
already and saying no, they haven't.
okay. So please, it's a criteria for anybody who's going to conduct research in Nigeria. You should have done that particular ethics course. It shows that you've had training in research ethics, and it's a prerequisite for any researcher in Nigeria. If you're going to conduct research in Nigeria, you should have done that course. So after now, we can talk further. It's not difficult to get. You also have affiliations that gives you access. I'm sure we've all heard about the principles of the ethical principles of respect for persons, beneficence, the principle of justice. But I want to speak on respect for persons because this is the principles that consent. So it says that you must look at every individual as an autonomous agent. If they are standing on board, let's talk about even children. Respect the time of your participant. Don't think because, for example, in the clinic, they've come to see clinic, and because of that, you are alpha and omega. You can waste their time as you wish because you are their consultant or you are the doctor seeing them. You must respect their time. That also hinges on the principle of respect. You must respect their religious inclination. You probably have a patient that is Jehovah's Witness who will not receive blood. Don't say you must that person will receive blood. Just start to respect that person, and you must give it to them. Now, for every research, another principle is the principle of beneficence. Whatever it is that you are doing as a researcher, be sure that you are maximizing benefits and minimizing the risks to the participants. Also, equitable selection of subjects. Very important. Sometimes some of you don't understand the issue, the principle behind inclusion and exclusion criteria. One of the things that inclusion, it gives you access to equitably select your participants. So it's not just, oh, these ones belong. And that's why I say when you send work to essay, it's not just enough to put your inclusion criteria. We're also sometimes looking at this distribution. So sometimes you probably have sent to it and somebody say, what is the distribution of your participants as per male to female? Because we want to see that there's equitable selection. Not that you are doing a study and in the study 80, you have 100, your sample size is 100. And out of the 100, and it's not a study that is limited to females. And out of the 100, you have 80 males and females. There's a problem with that selection. So sometimes we say, there should be equal distribution of your participants. The same thing also, equal distribution of the benefits. Like in trial, for example, after trial, there's what we call post-trial access to the medication. Everyone should have access to it, not some group of people. They said that everybody was involved in finding the efficacy of a particular vaccine, and the vaccine comes out has been found to be efficacious. And at the point, post-trial access, you say, oh no, it's people from a particular group, and you exclude all of that. We say no to that, because that is a breach of the principle of justice. Now, what's the implication of these regulations? It's emphasizing the principles and the need for protection of research participants. We have said that over and over again. And one thing you must understand, ignorance is no excuse for misconduct. Please, if you don't take home anything today, please note that. Ignorance is no excuse. I didn't know. Because once you become a researcher, there's a level of responsibility that comes on you. So ignorance is what? Is no misconduct. Of course, we also acknowledge the fact that we have some challenges with the application of some of these international regulations to our local context. I'll give a typical example here. For example, the issue of informed consent. You know, the informed consent as it states, as it's applicable outside this climate may be different for us in Africa. So some of us are beginning to look at, we need to begin to rewrite some of these guidelines in the context of Africa. For example, issue about consent. You know, outside the climes here, for a pregnant woman, you can obviously give consent for herself for some procedure. But we know that in some climes in Africa, a woman alone may not suffice for consenting. You need to get the consent from her spouse. So these are a bit of the peculiarities, you know, in our setting that we think that we need to review over time. And of course, there are a lot of discussions going on with respect to that. And also the issue we have also is the weak mechanism. I want to say that very expressly. We have very weak mechanism for monitoring compliance. For example, I use my institution as an example. I don't know how many institutions go about monitoring researchers because it's not enough for you to get ethical approval to conduct research. We also want to be sure that you're actually conducting the research as you said you will conduct. Have you sometimes interacted with researchers and they tell you that, oh, for this research under ethical consideration, consent will be obtained from participants, ethical clearance will be obtained from these, but they go ahead that study without obtaining consent. Of course, because we have very weak monitoring mechanisms to either begin to check if researchers do what they say they will do. So that's a challenge for us in this climate. We need to begin to set up mechanisms in place to monitor post-approval process. So we call it post-approval monitoring. We need to begin to do that. So we might be able to get some of these things. It's not like anybody is after to police anyone, but to be sure that it's all aimed at protecting our research participants. Now we go to another very important session that talks on what makes a research. Emmanuel Ezekiel was actually the one that developed this framework to tell us, so what really makes, so I want to assess using a tool to see if my research is ethical, what are the things that I must look out for? I also tell you that this is one of the framework, this is one of the criteria that the ethics committee use in approving research. So whenever you're submitting your work to the ethics committee, pass your work through this framework. The first is that for a research to be ethical, there must be scientific validity. So when you send your work, for example, for ethical review, and somebody is having issues with your science, and I hear some researchers ignorantly, they tell you ethics is not your business. You have no business with the science of my work. Just face the ethics. And I stand here to say that if your science is flawed, of course, the ethics of the work is also flawed. Because there must be scientific validity for any research to be ethical. And when we talk about scientific validity, your study design, your methodology must be sound. Because when your methodology is not sound, you put your participants at risk. You want to use cross-sectional study when exactly what you mean is case control. Or you want to use case control when exactly what you're describing is cohort. You're going to put your participants at risk. You're going to waste their time because you get nothing out of that research. And also there must be social value to your research. So how is the society going to benefit from your research? Sometimes the benefit of research might not be direct. When I mean direct, for example, it might not be that the participants will get some directly, but it could be something that the public will benefit from. For example, if you're contributing to knowledge, that knowledge could help prevent a disease. In a general public, might not be for a particular sect or a particular individual. Another thing you must consider is also the selection of your subjects. There must be fair selection, and that is why sampling is very important. Because one of the instruments in your methods that help to ensure this is your sampling. So when you're sampling, what you're trying to do is that you want to ensure there's fair subject selection. Not just your work is not linked to just one particular sect. We want to be sure that everybody have equal chance of being part of that study. Then also you must check the risk-benefit ratio. So when you're conceptualizing your study, you're drafting your proposal, you are looking at it, the benefits of any study should outweigh the risk. Once it's going the other way around, you need to stop that study because it's going to put your participants at risk. Then also there must be an independent review by an ethics committee. an unbiased umpire. That's what the ethics committee is, because ethics committee, of course, you expect that any ethics committee should be independent, and that's why it's called independent review board. So not influenced by external parties. They can't take decision solely, and all whatever it is that the ethics committees do should be aimed at protecting the research participants who are like orphans, because nobody will usually care for them. The researchers are usually only interested in the outcome of their research. Nobody talks about the research participants. But the ethics committee is only one body that is a mother and protects the research participants to be sure that they are safe throughout the entire research process. Also, there must be a place and a process for obtaining consent from your participants. So you don't conduct a research and just budge on your participants because you feel you have a right over them. No, because they are an autonomous agent, you must respect the rights of these participants. You must obtain their consent. And if they say they don't want to be a part of it, you must free them. It must be voluntary participation. You don't force or coerce participants into being a part of it. And whenever we see that element in any research proposal, it is a no-no from the ethics committee. And like I said, you must respect your participants. You must respect them. Respect their inclinations. Respect their values. Respect what they believe in. And don't force yours on them while conducting your study. So I've spoken about this already. And also to say that research will be such that promotes trust. You see, you must make your research transparent as much as you don't have, there should be nothing to hide. You must have nothing in your skeleton. You must come to the participants very clear, very open, the same way to the institutional review boards. You must come very transparent. And of course, the interests of the participant must be protected. Let me also say that whenever you're conducting your study in a shabbish way, when you're not conducting your study in line with good standard procedure, you are putting your participants at risk. So every researcher must ensure that the studies are conducted in accordance with what? Good clinical and laboratory practice. All these are aimed to ensure that the participants are kept safe. For example, you're going to conduct it, you want to withdraw blood from the participants, and you just go to the participants, oh yes, you've obtained consent for them for blood draw, and you just go there and put in your cannula, put in your needle. Without swabbing, you are putting your participants at risk because you have not done that particular procedure in line with the standard laboratory practice. You put your participants at risk. Now we go to consent. Because when you talk about ethics, most of us, ethics is more than informed consent. It's just one part. There are several other parts of it. It's a process by which a subject voluntarily confirms, please note the word voluntarily, confirm his or her willingness to participate in a particular research after being fully informed. That's another important point, because many times what we see is consent, not informed consent. So the researcher comes to the participants, I want you to be a part of it. I'm doing a study on blah, blah, blah. Very briefly, I want you to be a part of it. Please, can you sign this section? That's not informed consent. You're just obtaining consent. It's not informed, because you're not giving the participant information to make an informed decision whether he or she wants to participate in the particular study. Or an informed decision could be that you want to use the data of that particular, and let me speak on this. Now, sometimes we obtain data, I just feel like talking about this. You obtain data from participants, and in the consent that was given, what the participants gave consent for was the use of that data for that time being. There was no consenting for that particular data of the study. If you go ahead and use that data, you have committed an unethical practice. So if in the process of conceptualization of a study, you know that for this particular study, there is a prospect for future use of the data, please, as you're obtaining the consent for that interim study, also ensure that you get the consent of the participant for the use of that same data for future study. If you don't do that, you are doing something unethical. And if you want to come back, what you need to do is that you need to what? Reconsent the participants again. The only situation where the ethics committee may allow you to go scot-free from that is where it's found that it is difficult to contact. Sometimes you might find it very difficult to recontact the participants. Only then. Otherwise, if you have plans for future study, you must obtain consent for the use of the particular data for future studies. And also is that informed consent is documented. So there's what we call, if you look at if you've seen an informed consent form before, it has two parts. You have the information part, the information sheet, then you have the certificate sheet. That's where you sign. The person who is obtaining consent, the person who is giving consent. They both sign that session. And that just looks like a paper. That's a legal document. In clients where they understand the legal proceedings around consent form, somebody can go to jail for that. So whenever you're signing, don't just take it shabbily and just keep the paper and throw it anywhere. It's very important. It's a legal document. That's the document that tells you that this participant has given you the right or has agreed to be part of that particular study, has given you the right to conduct the various processes of your particular study on that participant. And one thing we must understand is that the informed consent process is not a one-time thing. No. I just obtain consent, that's the end. It's a process, and it should be continuous. So, for example, trial, for example, and you obtain consent. You've given the participants some information and the person the study, and the person consents to be part of it. If there is any new information, it is your responsibility as a researcher to go back again and inform that participant. You see why we say it's a continuing process. So based on the information you give to the participants can decide to, okay, based on this information, I initially said I will be a part of this, but I don't think I want to be a part of this. And you must respect the right of that participant not to be a part of the study anymore by the reason of the additional information that you've given to the participants. Now, researchers must know that a written document alone may not be sufficient to allow participants fully understand what it means and takes to participate. As I've said earlier, so it's not just the fact that they have just signed. If there's also any new information that will affect their participation, you must inform the participants. So like I said, it's ongoing. It's an interactive process, and it's not a one-time information session. We just come, we dump what we call information dumping. You just dump the information about the entire research and you say, give me consent. It should be a process, continuous. So there are times also, if it's a process, a study that's going to last for a period of time, you constantly also inform the participants any changes, any new information about the study that you think they need to know about or that will affect their participation, you need to let them know. So that's the transparency. A researcher who is ready to conduct research ethically must be transparent. Transparent to the research, to the participants, transparent in the entire research process, and transparent to the regulatory bodies. So the informed consent gives the following information. I'm sure if you've seen, after now, one of the things you go and try and see what an informed consent form looks like. So it gives information on the subject's rights, that the participation should be voluntary. There should be a statement as such in the consent form. And the participants can decide to withdraw whenever they don't feel like being a part of the study anymore. And one thing you must assure that when they withdraw, you will not stop them from receiving the standard medical care that they should have. So it's not a matter of, oh, I'm your consultant. I'm conducting this study. Okay, you withdraw from my study. Just know that from henceforth, you will not get your treatment anymore. No, that's unethical. So the fact that your participants withdraw from a study, they must continue to get the treatment that they need to get from you. So I've said also, if there are new findings, you must also inform your participants. And also if there's this one part that researchers, you see, like we say, the researcher must be transparent. So if there's any risk, documented risk, you're not saying that the participants will experience that risk, but there is already some documented risk from that particular procedure. It is your responsibility as a researcher to inform the participants. Also, very important is if there is any related injury or any concerns the participants have, there must be somebody to contact. And the principal investigator is the best person in that position. There must be somebody that the participants can contact. So you don't just, that's why I say the consent process is not a one-time thing. It's continuous. So the research participants needs to find some information, or his husband. There should be somebody to contact, and that should be available on the consent form. And if there are other options available, you need to let them know. That's still in the principle of transparency. So it's not because, oh, this option is where I'm interested in. And because of that, the participant must have just that treatment option. If there are also other treatment options that are available, let the participants know and let them make their choice. Very important is that the informed consent must be provided in the language that the participants understand. So we'll talk about the elements of informed consent. We say there must be information. Also, the participants must understand. Very important. They must understand. So if you are given a consent form and it's full of jargons, medical jargons that a participant cannot understand, that's not a consent form. So it must be in a way that the participant can understand. That you're using interpreters or translators, and they must be certified. So we are sure that, oh, indeed, these participants really understands what the research is all about. And when you are using translators, always know that you need to certify the accuracy of the translation. That's the standard. Now, there are several players in the research community. We all know you have the study population, the community, research community, the host where the research is going on, the ethics committee, sponsors, and the researchers are all partners. Now, to say a bit about the ethics committee, just for you to know, it's a committee that is designated to approve, monitor, and review biomedical and behavioral research involving humans. Now, what is the aim of this ethics committee? The aim, one singular aim that every other objectives is sitting on, is that the aim of that committee, one singular, is what? To protect the rights and welfare of research. So whatever it is that this committee is doing, the whole aim is to protect the rights and the welfare of the research subjects. Of course, the ethics committee comes to reviews. When we say initial review, so that's first review when you submit your work. That's the initial review. So for example, for a multi-year study, so every year you are going to be renewing. So each year you do, the ethics committee will do what we call a continuing review for multi-year study. What else do the ethics committee do? They notify investigators about the decisions of the ethics committee. So when you send your work to the ethics committee has the responsibility to give you a feedback. Yes, you submitted your work, but however, we have issues with A, B, C, and D, and you need to go and address this. That's a feedback, and that's the responsibility of the ethics committee. So you don't just submit your work to ethics and they just keep quiet, and you're just, no. And if they say they think the work is okay, they also let you know that, okay, we've seen it, we think your proposal is ethically compliant. You can go ahead and conduct your study. Of course, the ethics committee also review and approve changes in research activities. So you probably started off by saying, oh, I want to conduct this particular study this way. But along the way, I said, oh, what I think I want to modify. Of course, the ethics committee needs to review your modification and give an approval for that modification before you can modify. And let me say that a single researcher do not have the responsibility to alter any research process or protocol that have been approved by any ethics committee without getting an approval from the ethics committee. We see a situation where sometimes people get approval by ethics committee. In the approval, what's your sample size? What you agreed was 200. But later on, you sat down in your house and said, no, 200, no, I want to use 400. And by yourself, you go and use 400. Meanwhile, what was approved for you was 200. That is unethical. You are breaching principles of ethics. It is your responsibility to go back to the ethics committee and inform them. It doesn't take anything. It could be a mail, depending on what obtains in your institution, or a letter. I am modifying the sample size to be 400, no longer 200, due to reasons A, and it must be valid, A, B, and C. Of course, once we find out that this does not put the participants in any form of risk, the ethics committee will grant you the approval. And until you get that approval, you have no right to go and implement that particular change. So you must know that that's the standard practice. Also, it is the responsibility of the ethics committee to determine the risks of research. It is not the researchers. Yes, on your own, when you're designing your protocol, you can do a risk benefit and a variable, because of course you won't want to do a study where the risk is greater than benefits. But in the long run, the ethics committee makes the final determination of the risk Why do I say so? Sometimes researchers look at some studies and say, for this, my study, there is no risk. But you get to where they say, no, there is a risk. Probably the risk is not greater than minimal. But there's some form of risk in your study. So that's the responsibility of the ethics committee. Of course, protocols in the ethics committee are reviewed based on the level of risk. So we have exempt review, expedited review, and full board. As I've mentioned in the order, exempt, expedited, full board. It is an ascending order based on level of risk. So you say that what? The exempt studies have what? The less minimal amount of risk. The next one is the expedited. They have some form of risk, but full board studies, they have what? Greater risk compared to others. And that is the kind of study where you have the entire board of the ethics committee sit down to review. What kind of studies fall under this? There are studies where you have the involvement of vulnerable subjects. Please, can I say here that not every study that involves vulnerable subjects will go for a full board review. It depends on the level of risk as assessed by the ethics committee. For example, if I'm going to conduct a KAP study, knowledge, attitude, and practice of something among children, I'm not collecting blood samples. It's not the same thing as a study determining the prevalence of Lassa fever in the CSF of children. Are you seeing the two? That means I'm going to have to collect cerebrospinal fluid. That's a procedure that will entail some form of risk. It's different from just the time if my research is on knowledge, attitude, and practice. So why the second study will go for a full board review? The other one will just go for an expedited or an exempt, depending on what is written in the protocol and the risk as determined by the ethics committee. So those are the things that the ethics committee. You see, sometimes what you call risk, and there are some studies that appear there, sometimes we see researchers say that there's no risk. You say, what's the risk? Say, there's no risk in my study. That's not true. For example, you're going to be conducting a study on the prevalence of sexually transmitted disease among undergraduates of a particular institution. Now remember, and one of the questions in your questionnaire is asking the participants about their sexual activity. How sexually active, that's already increasing the risk of your study because you're going into some very, how will I put it? Areas that people will usually not to, areas that people will not want to talk about. You're impinging on their privacy. So that has increased the risk. So you will not come and say, oh, my study, there is no risk. It's different from just any type of knowledge, attitude, and practice study. So you see, at the end of the day, you see that the ethics committee makes a decision on the risk determination for the study, and that is what informs the type of review for a particular study. So this is a bit about that. You see it in your slides when I shared. So the categories based on the risk. Now, the pathway through an ethics committee review process. There are various pathways. One could be that when you send your work, your proposal to the ethics committee, the officer can come back with some changes, suggested changes. This is where most studies will come in. Yes, sometimes the ethics committee say, no, you need to modify this, you need to change this, you need to change, and you do the changes. The ethics committee reviews and say, okay, now we can approve the study. Or you may send your proposal to the ethics committee and they just approve it outright. That means all your study is ethically compliant. Or you may submit your study. This is the part that many researchers don't like to fall into this group. When you submit a proposal and it is denied, and the ethics committee say, oh, we are sorry, you cannot conduct this study. Or your work may go to the ethics committee and it comes, is revised. They tell you to revise and resubmit. That's a better one. So we say this proposal, we cannot accept it in this state. You need to go and revise it and resubmit. So the last one, the second to last I talked about is the one that many people don't want to fall into. A case where you send your work and the ethics committee says, no, we are sorry, you can't conduct this. So that means there's obviously the risk of the study is great. And there are so many things in your studies based on the proposal you submitted that will put the participant at risk, and no ethics committee will give approval or allow such study to fly. So I just used the timing of a particular institution to just describe to us. I don't know what obtains in our various institutions. But for the exempt review, I just want to say, because you see, I said on the ladder of risk, that is how the review comes. Exempt, many of them will usually not take so much time. That's why I talked about the 1 week. Of course, it varies across various institutions. Within a short period of time, when you send an exempt work for review, and usually exempt are those studies that require the use of secondary data, many of them will fall under exempt. And you have your expedited review. also would not take so much time, like the full board. Then you have the full committee review. The full committee review, that means the entire board of the ethics committee sits. For my institution, it's done once a month, and I think that's what obtains in many other institutions. Some people have it maybe once in 2 months, depending on the policy of their various institutions. So some people have it once in 2 months, once a month, but at least you should have ethics committee full board once a month. But depending on the level, the frequency with which you receive protocols, some people might be once in 2 months. So when your work goes for full committee review, what it means is that it's going to take some time for review, because such work you have the entire to be shared to the end of the board of the ethics. They will review, together to sit down and take a decision about the particular work in question. So when does the HREC review end for a study? When the study is completed. That is when your ethics committee review ends. So ideally, even while the ethics committee, while your study is being conducted, we are looking at your work. What we call post-approval monitoring. It's something that is still not so strong. The process is still weak in our institutions in Nigeria. But we're hoping we'll get there. It will get there soon. We have, in my institution, we'll be able to conduct some in-country and also within our institution, in-country and outside the country. It's very important because that's one of the ways to check, assess the strengths of an ethics committee. You must be able to not just give approvals to everybody, but we must be able to monitor a few approvals that we have given to ensure that these approvals, the studies for which these approvals given are conducted in line with what was given. So I want to pause at this moment a bit before I go to the next. I don't know if there's any feedback from the house, or do I have the permission to go ahead?
I think you should go ahead, man.
Okay,
No
all right.
question to
Okay.
answer on the.
Okay. So we go to another very important part of research ethics, because it's also, they all align, research ethics, integrity, the concept of plagiarism. There are three brothers. So this is one of the brothers. When we talk about research misconduct, there are three brothers. We have fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. But I will just talk about plagiarism because that's the content of what I was given. But maybe just say a bit about that. We see that research misconduct is defined as fabrication. And this is a definition that was given by the U.S. Office of Research Integrity. It's defined as fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism. Now look at where it comes in. Both in proposing your study, in performing your study, reviewing your research, or in reporting your research results. So any of this process that was implemented in all of these stages of your research, that means you're conducting, if you have carried out any of them, many of us have been involved in either of this. We'll find out as we go ahead. Fabricating results. So sometimes, we after conducting your research, and that's the so-called, one thing, I remember, okay, someone said something. He said, when you, yes, that's Professor Joe Lutade. When you torture data, sometimes data will confess something. And when you torture and torture, it might end up confessing something you want. So sometimes researchers are good at fabricating, to fabricate the data to fit where you are going to. Because sometimes researchers conduct research with something in mind. So they want to make sure that the data I'm collecting must fit into this outcome that I want. And in the process, they fabricate. You could also falsify data, what is not existing, you put it there also. Then you also could also plagiarize. And we're going to be, with the import of this theory, we're going to be looking at plagiarism majorly. Looking at plagiarism majorly. So it's what's plagiarism? It's the appropriation of another person's ideas, processes, results, or words without giving appropriate credit. It's fine that you can pick, of course, you may get somebody's result, you understand, or use it for something, maybe probably in the course of your research work. But the problem is when you don't give appropriate credit when you do so. It happens sometimes in our place of work. Like we said, ethics is about values. It's about morals. What should be done? What's the right thing to be done? Aside research, let's look at it. You get somebody's idea, like what happens in our place of work. Oh, somebody gives you an idea for a proposal, beautiful proposal, and you went ahead and presented that proposal maybe in a meeting or something, and you got all the applause. It is appropriate for you to acknowledge and let this close. Oh, thank you for complimenting my presentation. But however, I want to say on this floor that this idea was drawn from the work my colleague AAA did. That's the ideal thing to do. That's morals, that's the right, that's value. Aside research, but we're saying in research, applying that in research, that when you get somebody's idea or process or something, you use it in the course of a research work, it is appropriate for you to give credit to that person. And whenever you don't do this, you are violating ethical principles. And what makes plagiarism wrong is that it impedes on your professional integrity. For a researcher who plagiarizes, then we are questioning your integrity. And you know what happens is that when, it's not like what we see in this climate, some of us, because obviously some more times everybody goes, when you do something wrong, you just go, nobody does anything to you. But what's the worst thing that can happen to a researcher is for people to begin to query your integrity as a researcher. Nobody wants to, nobody, no international organization, no collaborator, no partner wants to work with a researcher with questionable integrity. And that's why one of the things before they engage into collaborating with you, they want to find out your integrity as a researcher. So whenever you plagiarize, what you're doing is that what it impedes on your professional integrity. Another thing also is that it misleads, you mislead researchers. What is not yours, you make them think it's your own. It's your original idea. You're misleading the readers, those who are going to read your publications. You mislead the public. Then finally, is also that it damages your credibility and reputation. And the process of managing this, it could result in the process. Now, let's look at the forms of plagiarism. As we go ahead, you discover, just be reading through and be marking the ones that relate to you. Many of us at some point or the other have done any of this. What is important is that as we hear this, as we know this, we go and see no more from here. Direct plagiarism. So you are copying, that's the, well, you people, you know, those days when we're younger and you say copycat, copying word for word. Direct plagiarism, no, you're just copying it word for word. That is the extreme of it. Then you have the mosaic plagiarism. That's where many of us also we do. So you mix some copied phrase, some of the phrases, you copy them word for word, and you mix them with your own words. So, you know, it's a mosaic, you have two different, not the same form all through. So you're mixing. Then another one is the paraphrasing plagiarism. You're going to see an example as we go ahead. I decided to put an example to see what, for us to look at what it looks like to paraphrase and when it becomes plagiarism. You change word slightly. And after changing the word slightly, you don't cite. Because the plan is that when you change the word, I think people will not know. So you change the word without citing. That's paraphrasing. Then there's the self-plagiarism. Plagiarizing yourself. So it could be that you use your previous work, you use something from your own thesis, not another person's work, your own thesis. You use something without disclosing it. Oh, this work was actually, oh, this idea was from my PhD thesis that was published this author, this date and the date. So when you do disclosure, that's self-plagiarism. And of course, the accidental plagiarism, failing to cite properly by mistake. But remember what we said, that what? Ignorance is not what? It's not an excuse for misconduct. So just to look at some examples. So when you copy text from a journal article, there is an expectation. When you copy text, you should be a quote. Put this in inverted comma. This is the text that was, you know, everybody knows that this was copied. When you use somebody's work, somebody's data without citing them, without citation, that's plagiarism. You're using a published paragraph from your thesis. Now that's where we come in with self-plagiarism. Without disclosure, that becomes self-plagiarism. Of course, you change words. You keep the structure, you change the words without citation. That's paraphrasing plagiarism. And of course, we must understand that plagiarism can take place at any stage through the research process. It can come during the literature review. You can plagiarize methodology or an unpublished data, yes, but you must actually, is the disclosure, that's the most important thing. Or duplicate publications, as we see. And you duplicate your publication, you publish here, and put the same work, you just do a little bit, and you send. That's a problem. That's also research misconduct. Now, there are several forms of plagiarism that can be forgiven during writing, when you're publishing, but there's one plagiarism that nobody will forgive you for. And that's the plagiarism of methodology. We'll see that as we come ahead. Go ahead. Methodology and discussion. Somebody can, in the consequence of putting probably your literature review, that's all you play. But you see, plagiarism that involves your methodology and discussion, it's a fatal flaw. Let me use that word. It's a fatal flaw. So every researcher, you must guide against plagiarism. What can happen when you plagiarize? You can have, if you go to Retraction Watch, you'll see some papers that have been retracted. Wasted science, wasted energy. Remember that before you conduct every research. That's why I always tell people, when you're conducting your research, for that participant that is giving you their time, it's a lot. For a person to spend 30 minutes of their time to fill your questionnaire, that's a lot. So when you end up doing those researches and they don't go as intended, that means you've wasted the time of that participant. So when you plagiarize, your work can be retracted. And that's something, because one of the things it does, it blacklists you as a researcher. Nobody wants to experience that. You also lose your reputation as a researcher. You could have some legal sanctions. And of course, if it's an institution that has a very functional office of research integrity, you also go through investigations. It could even come in various forms. You might lose your promotion. Insurance can decide to retract. You discover that, the papers you submitted for your last promotion were all plagiarized. Or they can withdraw your promotion. So those are things that can happen. There are several softwares to detect. And many of us, we are quite familiar with Sonitim. Also have Authenticate. You have Grammarly plagiarism. I always tell people, before you send your work through to the journals, use a plagiarism checker to check your work thoroughly before you send your work for publication. It's very important. Of course, there are some level of similarity that is actually required, but then it's always best to always use a software tool to check and detect. And the fact is that the software tools, they vary. There are some that you might use, you might not detect plagiarism. Some of the journals, they have more sophisticated, and it will be so bad that when they pass your work through. So I tell people as much as possible, avoid plagiarism. It's fine. You use people's work, please cite appropriately. Acknowledge them in your work. We can also detect plagiarism through some manual detection. Sometimes when you see some inconsistent writing styles, that can be a pointer sometimes that, this work is being plagiarized. This Now, I wanted to talk about this. I raised there to raise this very, very clear. So there are some acceptable similarity difference, depending on the journals and your schools, institutions. Some may allow some level of similarity to about 10 to 20%. It depends on the institution's policy, institutional policy, and also the journal policy. But as much as possible, I tell people, don't get to 20 as much as possible. Limit yourself to 10. Yeah, like I said, there are some unacceptable plagiarism of your methodology or your discussion. Not acceptable. Even 1% is not allowed at all. There should be your core, your idea. It's not allowed. So I just wanted to give an example of this paraphrasing. Maybe later when you look at the slide, you can just go and look at it through. If you look at the initial original work, it says effective communication is essential in research because it allows scientists to share findings, build knowledge, and inspire innovation. That's the original. Now look at the Paul paraphrase. It says what? Good communication is important in research since it helps researchers share results and promotes new ideas. It's too close. If you look at both the structure, the way it was phrased, very close to the original work. But if you look at it, I want you to look at the next one. You see, it says clear and consistent communication enables researcher to exchange discoveries, expand collective understanding, and encourage creative progress in science. You see, this is is farther away from the original. But then, even when I do this, it's important to cite, very important. So I don't, even though I've paraphrased, I don't now own the idea and say, because I paraphrased, oh, it's now my own. No, it's also important to acknowledge through citation where you got that from. So are there roles that the institution can play in plagiarism? Obviously, yes. So the institution needs to have policies on plagiarism. That's something that is still lacking in our supervisors. I'm very happy I'm talking to medical students. Some of us have probably done a community medicine project, or you are yet to do. It's also important. Supervisors need to train their students on academic writing. It's very important. Very important. Sometimes I've had to supervise students, and sometimes you see what they send to you. I will just laugh. And once I find you out, you go, and for me, for the students I supervise, you're going to be in hot soup. Also, because I believe that you just have to get it right from the beginning. You can't afford to be plagiarizing as a student. Even when you stop being student, you shouldn't. You must get it right from the start. Take your time to learn. Take your time to know. Take your time to look at the literatures properly. And one of the things I will say as I go ahead is, there's this next thing, because it's going to be the subject of debates, but it shouldn't be, because it's very clear, you know. And I want it to be a food for thought for us. And what's it? It's reusing my own work, plagiarism. So any response from the house? So I've been talking, so I want to get a feedback.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. So I'm asking a question for us to a little brainstorm before we end this session. Is reusing my own work plagiarism? Or how can, yeah.
I think when it is cited properly, it shouldn't be plagiarism.
Okay, okay. Any other person? You're very much in order. Any other person? So if I decide to reuse my work, it's my work and I'm still doing another research, still same me. Is that plagiarism? Anybody? Okay. Since we don't, so let's see what it is. So there are situations where self-plagiarism may be acceptable. For example, when you're using a methodology or a standard procedure, you're repeating the same methodology in research, plagiarism. But when you acknowledge the source, it's no longer self-plagiarism. And I had to give an example. See the example there. It's important to disclose. Disclosure is the key. The methodology used in this study was adapted from our previous publication. Put the author and the year, and it has covered that already. But if you now go ahead and repeat the same thing without doing that, then that is what we call self-plagiarism. Another scenario, when you have to do studies on a long-term basis, sometimes you discover that your study, the current study, can be a follow-up from the pilot. It's important to state that this particular new work I'm doing, this particular research, is actually extending from the earlier findings of the research conducted by this in this year. It's still my same work, but I've made it clear that this work I'm doing is not just like an idea that is just standing on its own. It's a follow-up on the other. So that will no longer be self-plagiarism. Like I said also, you can reuse content from your thesis or your dissertation, but it's important to disclose. The secret should always be what? Disclosure. So you can publish some portions of your thesis, but it's important that you disclose it. And how do you do that? You can say this article is derived in part from a PhD dissertation submitted to, put it, the author, you can include so, and so, submitted to this particular school. So nobody is thinking that this is a new work. They don't, oh, this is coming from a work that the same author have done earlier before. So you see, it's all about transparency. You're not hiding anything. Whatever it is that you do, you make it open. Oh, this thing this particular idea was from here. Oh, this write-up is not mine. Like many people own other people's write-up. No, it was from here and you cite. That means you're acknowledging the effort of the other person. So in conclusion, plagiarism is both unethical, but the good thing is that although unethical, but it's avoidable. Proper citation, proper paraphrasing and referencing, they are essential if you want to avoid plagiarism. You must learn how to cite properly. You must learn how to paraphrase properly. And you must learn how to reference. It's important. You know, you have many tools, like I said earlier. I said you pass, it's always good before you send your work for publication, pass it through a plagiarism checker. But beyond the plagiarism checker is you. So integrity should guide you. You know, I always tell people that when we do the wrong things, except we decide to deny it ourselves, we always know. So beyond the tools you use is your own integrity. And as much as possible, when you uphold originality, it builds trust. It builds trust in research. So I don't know. Dr. Lawa, do we still have time?
Yeah, we still have about 9 minutes more.
Okay, let me just, the other part, I don't know, I hope we'll be able to have a virtual lab, not maybe today, on referencing. If for those a hands-on, yes, on how to, but I just put a few things here. I don't know the time because it's something that would have been better off. Just to know that one of the ways, like we said earlier, to actually prevent plagiarism was proper referencing. So you must learn how to reference, because I said ignorance is no excuse. I don't know how to do it. It's not an excuse. You must learn how to do it. It's important. So you must acknowledge sources. Yeah, some people try to do manual referencing, but please, it wastes time. I always tell people, why do you want to follow the long journey when you already have a short way that's made? You have reference managers that will help you to do your very effective referencing rather than doing the manual. If you have a long document, how are you going to have to reference every one of them manually? So reference managers, they tend to automate your citation. They improve accuracy and they help you to save time and save your efforts. There are so many of them. You have them. I will advise you either you get used to. There are some that are very user-friendly. Mendeley is very nice. You have Zotero too, very good. You also have others. You have EndNote, RefWorks, just a bit paid. These are other Mendeley Zotero free. So you can easily download them and begin to use them. One of the things why Mendeley, one of the core features in Mendeley, you have this PDF annotation. So of course you can move from PDF, move to your library. Then also it synchronizes. You can synchronize with your cloud straight off. So if you're storing in the cloud, for Mendeley, you can also store straight up. It also has this word plugin also. So as I have it in my library, I can just move straight and begin to use on my Microsoft Word. It allows for group collaboration. Those are some of the strengths of Mendeley. Just to install, if you, make sure you've not done that. I think that's something that you might need to do after now. I'll share these slides with you. You have, just go to www.mendeley. You need to create an account and you download the reference manager. When you download the reference manager, please, also importantly, is also to download the Microsoft Word plugin. Otherwise, you will not be able to make use of it in your Word. Is important. So you just have things on your library and you cannot make use of them on Word. So they go together. You download the reference manager and download the Word plugin. Okay, this is the login in. I tried to do some share. I don't know how I wish. No, but it's something that it's not a theory thing. It's hands-on. It's hands-on. So the day we're going to, everybody will be having, you, as we are saying it, you have your laptops, you're doing it, you're practicing it on your, but it's something it's not difficult. It's not difficult. It's just like you have an app that is helping you to reference rather than doing things manually. Yeah. So basically, all right. I think that's the end of my presentation. I hope We got something at the end of this.
We got a lot of things. I actually learned a lot of things again. I mean, it's a refresher for me. Thank you very much. I think we can use the Zoom applause to show our appreciation of this. Of course, I'm not surprised. It's something I've known Dr. Bitere for. So we have few minutes. We would like to take one or two questions, maximum of two questions. Except okay, so
Show can unmute. He has raising his hand.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Ma, for the lecture. So my question is concerning informed consent. So I wanted to ask that, is it ethical to like push a form of incentive or reward to participants while like trying to get their informed consent on a research, especially when like the population of the research are kind of reward motivated to participate? So is it, as a researcher, is it ethical to say, okay, or after participating in this, you would have something? So that's my question.
Okay, so let me just address it straight away. So as a researcher, you shouldn't be conducting research, because what it means is that when you give that, I hope you know that the participants are no longer being part of that study voluntarily anymore. So you have removed the voluntariness of the study. So many of them will usually be part of that study because of what they want to get from you, and that's a problem. So what I only tell researchers to do, depending on the kind of study you're going to use, is going to take a lot of the time of the participants. Just give them something that is not enough to coerce them. For example, if people will wait after my clinic to be part of a study, for example, maybe just few minutes, because it's going to take them, I could probably want to give them snacks and drink. That's not something enough to make somebody to say, I have to be a part of this study. Because we just want to ensure that as you're conducting the study, that voluntariness is still there. Anything that impinges on that voluntariness, there's a problem. So you might just give them something that is not enough. For example, if I say, if you're going to be part of my study, I'll give you 50,000. I can tell you that everybody will want to be part of that study. It's not going to be voluntary anymore because something is pushing them to be part of it. They are being coerced by that particular incentive that you're giving. So if you're giving any incentive for whatever, it mustn't be such that will coerce your participants to being part of your study. They will still be able to have their free will and voluntariness to either be part or not be part of the study.
thank you very
Did I
much,
answer
Ma.
your question?
Thank you very much, Ma.
Yeah, if we have any other question I can take within the next 3 minutes, that will be fine. Is there any hand up? Oh, two hands up. Okay. Please, straight to the point, Nimat.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. That was very, very sorry. That was a lot to like take in. And speaking of a lot, first let me appreciate you once again. But speaking of a lot, it was a lot trying to like follow you and at the same time jot some things down. So I don't know if the material can be available such that like we can get back to
You have
it
the slide.
maybe when we're like, is that going to be possible, ma'am?
You have the material,
Yes.
Nimat.
Yes.
All right.
I will
Thank you very
share
much,
the
ma'am.
material. Yes, I'll share.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. Siambola.
Okay. So, okay.
I guess he's having network
Anybody hear
issues.
me?
We can hear you.
Okay.
We
Yes.
can
Thank
hear
you.
you.
Mine is actually about research ethics. So I want to ask, in a situation whereby the implication of particular research is not known to both the person conducting the research and also the research ethics, and probably in the nearest future there was sort of like implication getting to like the like, I mean, the implication was made known that this research actually caused this. Like, do you think there's going to be any legal consequences to something like that, or it can also be excused as, I don't know. That's basically my question, ma.
I think your question is
If I
clear,
ask,
Dr.
you
Peter.
want to give a scenario? You want to use a scenario. What implication do you mean? That's
Okay. For
Okay.
instance, it is not actually based on facts right now. I'll have to go and do my research on that.
Okay.
But
I
let's
think
say,
I
for
can help
instance,
you
a
put the
drug
question clearly.
is not known to.
Hello?
okay.
Yeah, let me help you put your
Hello,
question clearly.
hello.
Yeah. I think okay.
The,
I get what you
during the course of your research, is side effect or an adverse event get to be known with the disease with the intervention?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let me go because it's something I'm doing currently and I've been, involved in, very practical. So sometimes you might actually, for a drug, let me use a drug. Now, there's something we call an investigator brochure for a drug. So that investigator brochure gives you all the side effect, that likely side effect that will be, encountered, that may be encountered with the drug. But somehow when you're also trying a drug, you might need to see something to have things like, probably it now results in some untoward effects to the participants. You have things like serious, unexpected, severe adverse events and all that. Now, nobody is going to blame the researcher, but you know where we will blame you is when you do not report. So as you're conducting that study, when you see those particular side effects that were not initially in the brochure, it is expected that you report this to the regulatory body. And this report should be timely. It is when you don't do this, that is when there's a consequence. Because of course, there are several things that will come evolving. Side effects will come evolving while you're trying a drug through research, a clinical trial. That is expected, that is allowed. But what is important is that when they do occur, that you report to the necessary regulatory body. And of course, because this is very important in ensuring the safety of the participants, when we now discover that there are so many side effects that are coming up with this particular trial, yes, there's a limit, a minimal level, about 10%, NAFDAC gives 10% thereabouts. But when you now begin to have things beyond that, then we are looking at this. Are you sure that this drug is safe for the participants? Do we need to stop this study at this point in time? Do we need to pause and conduct further study on the safety and tolerability of this particular drug? Then that may inform the decision for that. But nobody is going to blame you for it. But most important is that when you have such things in the course of a study, you must report to the regulatory body. And who are these regulatory body? The Health Research Ethics Committee and NAFDAC if it's a drug trial. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much, ma. Thank you. Yeah, I understand you, ma. Thank you, ma.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. I mean, we can't appreciate you well enough, Dr. Guteri, for not only taking this class, also volunteering to come back to take reference, in which we really appreciate well. And we'll definitely look into the calendar and see how we can fix that into it. Thank you very much. And thanks for being a very interactive audience as well. We'll continue the session next week, Wednesday. Do have a lovely weekend. Rest of your weekend as well. Thank you,
Thank
ma.
you very much, sister.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Bye, ma'am.